Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation. The title of my presentation is Cybersecurity and 5G. My name is Seppo Virtanen and I'm an Associate Professor of Cybersecurity Engineering at the University of Turku. The outline of my presentation is here, so I'm first starting with some definitions regarding cybersecurity and information security, then talk a little bit about intrusion and intrusion detection and prevention, then focus on smart environments and IoT and their cybersecurity, which is a very key application area in terms of 5G, and then conclude with some 5G specific considerations for cybersecurity. First of all, let's define the terms cybersecurity and information security. So we all know that these are often used as synonyms in the spoken language, but actually, if we really look at the details, so cybersecurity is a broader concept, and you could say that information security is one part of cybersecurity. So in cybersecurity, we are targeting a state where the operating environment that consists of one or more digital information systems can be trusted and its operation is secured. And the focus is then in considering network connections and network digital systems and the security and protection in these. And we are also talking even at the societal level of the security. So some factors in cybersecurity include information security, continuity management, for example, in businesses, if there is some disruption or an attack against some business. So continuity management aims to preserve the operations as well as possible in those crisis situations. Also, at the society level, we can have or should have preparedness for different kinds of crises in terms of cybersecurity. For example, if electronic voting would be used in governmental elections, so that would be something that requires this preparedness if there's going to be a cyber attack, for example, against that sort of system. Whereas then in information security, we go a bit more into the detail level so that we make the arrangements to ensure that the availability, integrity, and confidentiality of information can be ensured, and the focus is on information and protecting the information. Some ingredients of information security include the protection of digital and physical recordings, human knowledge, and protecting data both in storage and also during data transfer. Very traditionally, the security goals are identified as this so-called CIA triad. CIA comes from confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality means that the contents of or the data, the information is revealed only to those parties who have the privileges to access that information. So for example, by using specific kinds of encryption, we can ensure that only some specific parties can access and decrypt the information. Integrity means that the data that we have has not been tampered with, it has not been altered, but it's in the original format and content that it was when it was created by that entity who created it. So it has not been changed, for example, during transportation or in storage without leaving a mark. Finally, availability means that even though we ensure confidentiality and integrity of the information, we still also need to make it available. So that means that those who have the right to access the information will be able to access it, and also from another point of view, you can consider that some information is made available and we try to keep it available even if there is some crisis or attack going on. So we want for example, some web servers to be available even in those situations. So we need robustness and protection for those situations to make sure that the information remains available. So then how do we achieve the goals of the CIA model? We need to take into account both the technological and the human elements of cyber security when we store the information, when we process it, and when we transfer the information. And some very almost obvious things that we need to take into account is regular backups to make sure that we are able then to recover, for example, from broken systems if some systems fail and hard drives break, so we are able to restore the information. We also need to recognize the value of information, so even some very seemingly not so valuable documents may be valuable in terms of how many hours have been spent for creating this information, and so that needs to be protected both from attacks and then these accidents or devices breaking up. Then when we are considering availability and confidentiality, we need to find the right balance for those, meaning that we can't make information so difficult to access that it no longer is feasibly available. So this appropriateness in the levels of protection needs to be considered. Regular updates are of course very important, as well as protection against malware and unauthorized users accessing the system. And then the human element from the point of view of training the users, increasing their cybersecurity awareness, that should be done on site to make sure that, for example, that employees understand the local cybersecurity policies and have up-to-date knowledge about how they should deal with certain kinds of information. Encryption is, of course, a very good way of assisting us in reaching the different goals of the CIA model, both for storage and transfer. So then let's consider intrusion and then intrusion detection in computing systems. In the 1980s, you could say that the goals that hackers and malware authors had, they were mostly for showcasing the skills they have, how talented they are in programming, or trying to gain access to systems, or even making pranks to some friends or other hackers or malware authors. But then in the mid-1990s, the general public found their way to the network when Windows 95 and Internet Explorer came out, and suddenly now there was this tilt towards a situation when we have a huge number of network users that have some information that is worth money. And that trend has, of course, been getting stronger throughout the years. So nowadays, everybody in practice has some information that is worth money, for example, in the form of online banking credentials. From that time also, we saw the rapid emergence of online shopping and spam email. So when so-called regular users, general public, started using the internet, so then this was a great opportunity for, on the other hand, starting this business of buying things online, and on the other hand, trying to advertise things online with spam email. And the malicious actors then at this time started also on focusing on some sort of gain, not just showcasing their skills or making pranks, but to financial and political gain. So the goals for a modern day cyber attacker often are either financial, for example, trying to fish for credentials using emails or fake websites or even malware. Also trying to steal them, for example, by using keylogger malware on some system, trying to distribute that, and then the keylogger records all the keystrokes in the system. Health records could be stolen, and then some ransom could be demanded for those not to be released. Identity theft and extortion are also forms of or ways of trying to get financial gain when doing cyber attacks. Then there are also political or ideological goals. For example, for some rival government or organization, try to generate the distributed denial of service attack against their their systems so that their servers and networks will go down and nobody will be able to access those. Or espionage, some kind of similar methods could be used as for financial gain, but now when we're talking about financial gain, this is very often targeted at the general public. But in terms of espionage, probably the target is more precise. So it may be a specific group of people, for example, who are the target of this sort of attack. And then there is hybrid warfare, for example, trying to cripple infrastructure or influence general opinion, for example, in social media. So there are two main ways of breaking into systems, and of course then these can be combined to get maximum effectiveness. So the technical side is when you try to exploit some technical weaknesses and vulnerabilities that exist in the target systems. This of course then requires some technological expertise. So one needs to know what sort of vulnerabilities have existed or currently exist in some systems made by some specific manufacturers, and then how these can be taken advantage of, and what sort of results can be expected in that situation. So there is time and effort required, especially if the target is not known beforehand. So to first do the research and figure out what sort of equipment is being used. This is often, this technical way of breaking into system is often such that it includes also attempts for either breaking passwords or phishing for them, or using malware to catch some information that or allow access to some system. But then the other way is to exploit the human element, so-called social engineering, where you try to persuade a legal user to hand out information like passwords. And this, of course, then speeds up the intrusion process because you can skip some of the difficult technical phases if somebody can be persuaded to give you detailed information about the target you are attacking. It's really a big issue, these vulnerabilities. So here is some statistics that I have gathered over the years from the same source. Number of annually reported newly discovered vulnerabilities. So as you can see, they are on the increase all the time. So when we get new software, new systems, they often have some flaws that cause these vulnerabilities, and that's why we need to keep systems up to date and install updates as soon as we are offered them. Very easily you can find out then, for example, from many websites, you can figure out the server software version from the HTTP response status lines and these header comments. For example, here the server announces its version number, and then you could look, for example, for those possible vulnerabilities that are known to exist in that system, and if it's not patched, so then it may be still vulnerable for those. Like I said, so the server weaknesses and vulnerabilities, they are the result of flawed software implementations, or also they could be errors in configuration. So ways of taking advantage of these could be, for example, cross-site scripting, SQL injections, and then denial of service attacks, and a very specific kind of systems also relevant in terms of 5G and IoT is the supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA systems that are found in industrial processes and manufacturing plants, for example, to control some processes, and these often are required to be using some specific version of an operating system, and it may be very difficult to apply patches for vulnerabilities, even though these are usually in a separate network. So still there may be a way for a hacker to find their way in one way or another to these SCADA systems, and maybe even cause physical damage, like, for example, with the Stuxnet malware that was used some time ago to disrupt industrial processes. So then, of course, we want to prevent the intrusions, and for that we can use, for example, firewalls, and then special systems called IDS and IPS systems, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems. And also an important thing, of course, to try to prevent intrusion is to have a good password policy, so that the users will have to select passwords that are not easily guessed by the intruder. So then if we are intruded, so we want to detect this intrusion, then we want to mitigate its effects, and then afterwards we want to consider the effects. There is a quotation from a well-known researcher in the field that inevitably the best intrusion prevention system will fail. And so when the prevention fails, then we need to still be able to detect the intruder and stop the attack, and then detect the illegal user from the systems and remove them so that they don't have access and can't return. But then there are also plans needed for the continuity, and also a process for countering the attack, so that if something like this happens, the organization must have some way of trying to deal with the issues. And then afterwards, an evaluation of the events and the adequacy of the organization's own processes is needed. And one thing to consider is also physical information and cyber security. So if the attacker gains physical access to the premises, the target site, and the devices, so then they don't need to break so many technical barriers to achieve their goal. They can install, for example, unnoticeable spying devices using some wireless communication technology that then transmits data to the attacker. They could install malware on site, steal equipment, or destroy equipment, or something like this. Next, I'm going to talk about cybersecurity in smart environments and IoT, and for that, I first define smart environments. So here's a picture of a possible smart city, all sorts of things happening there based on IoT systems and smart technology, and the goal there is that these smart devices and systems work all the time, and their goal is to make everyone's life easier and more comfortable, and in terms of when we talk about cities, so to also optimize the use of resources. A very key area in all smart environments is data acquisition and analysis, and this data acquisition is needed because we want to obtain information and automate systems based on that information, so that we are able to enable these smart environments. I like to always say that we should consider these smart environments at different abstraction levels. So we have the smart personal space, where we consider, for example, things like measuring our own health related and well-being related data using smart sensors. Then we have smart rooms, where the room is aware of the user, and we could have, for example, home automation as a part of this smart room level. Then we go to smart buildings, where we have building automation. We could have office hot desking, meaning that when you just arrive at the office, you choose any desk and it recognizes you and makes all the adjustments and places, for example, the correct applications on your workspace, so that they are where you left them in the previous desk you used. And also then in the buildings, if there are common areas or public areas, so the safety and comfortability of those areas. And then we come to smart city and society, and again another abstraction level, where we then consider things like smart traffic, or even automated public transportation, automatic law enforcement, optimizing city or society resources, and even enabling e-participation. This picture here displays now one possible scenario of this sort of smart environment that has to do with all of these different abstraction levels. So there is a patient in a room. The patient's medical data is being measured by sensors, and then in this room there is user awareness, and this data is refined before it's sent to building level storage, for example, for the local caregivers to monitor the data and make decisions based on it. And then it can also be made available at the larger, let's say the city or society level, even, so that some remote caregiver can access the data, and some expert can, for example, then be consulted easily in this sort of environment. So like I said, the smart personal space is often dealing with health and well-being for the individual. And here, for example, you are seeing a smartwatch that is measuring the heart rate and the activity of someone using it. And then we could have, for example, automated insulin pumps or heart pacemakers that can even give you the defibrillation shock if there is some sort of cardiac arrest detected. In smart buildings, then you have automation for function and control, like, for example, automation for lighting and power sockets and door locks. Also heating, ventilation, and general status monitoring can be included in the smart building level. IoT also here is a very key enabling concept. And this is scalable, so it goes from detached houses to apartments and office buildings. So you could say that there's private smartness in your own apartment, but then public smartness in the common spaces and building level safety and security. For example, in case of emergency, the building could know how many people are inside and in which areas. Then when we go to the smart city level and beyond, so we are talking about innovative development utilizing ICT technologies, sensors and devices that gather information that is then refined into knowledge that can be used when we run different systems efficiently and use resources efficiently and conveniently. But now we are gathering data from many different sources, so citizens, devices, and systems, and then this is processed, and this, of course, then already starts to raise a lot of security and privacy questions. A smart city can't function if its design hasn't given attention to all the levels of abstraction in the smart environment. Data transportation is very important in smart environments, and here is just some examples of so-called war driving in a southwestern Finnish city. You can see that there are quite a few Wi-Fi hotspots around the city, and some of them are secure and some are unprotected and some have obsolete protection. But so we have this abundance of data transportation networks everywhere, and this is kind of maybe also could be considered using this resource in addition to 5G, for example, as a backup in providing for smart city communication. When we then think about these smart environments, we need to consider cybersecurity very carefully. If we are not able to make the systems secure enough so that the users will trust them, nobody will want to use those technologies. And that's why it's very important that we don't overlook cybersecurity when doing designs for smart environments at any abstraction level, even though we might have a rush to deploy the new technology so that we could get revenues from for example, manufacturing some new sensors or IoT devices. So the cybersecurity and safety concerns need to be addressed already at the earliest phases of the specification and design. And also the technologies will be or need to be such that the user gets a benefit out of them without making them vulnerable to any security and safety and privacy risks. So security should not be considered as a feature, but rather an emotional response to the overall system, so that you have a feeling of freedom from risk, freedom from danger, doubt, and fear, so that instead of just having a security feature in the system, you are able to have this kind of feeling about the system. In the smart environments, there are lots of concerns then for cybersecurity and privacy. For example, when considering health data, so when we are gathering data from patients and using that for deciding on treatment, either automated or by a physician. So this is very private data and it requires strong protections. But on the other hand, then the sensors and implants that are used for gathering this information and transmitting it, they are very limited in processing power and power supply. So we need technologies that support low power and lightweight, but still a strong encryption, for example. So the traditional security technologies are not directly applicable in smart environments where we might use, for example, 5G for data transportation. In this example, keys for encrypting traffic from the patient's sensors are derived from the individual's heartbeat, so that they are always unique and secure keys, so they do not repeat from one patient to another, but always unique for that connection. And this is one way of achieving secure cryptographic keys without having to do very heavy mathematical computations like in some traditional approaches. But then about this data privacy also, so one consideration is given here that now this smartwatch here is saying that the person who has been using it didn't sleep too well. Nightly recharge is compromised. So now if you wanted to get the most out of this watch, you would create an account with the manufacturer's online service, and then also probably, for example, sync it with some other ecosystem, like for example Google's system if you are an Android user. And so now then all your data is in these systems, and also the watch is on your wrist, and then in the morning on your way to work you drive off the road and you wreck the car. But now if the insurance company would know that you didn't sleep too well, so would they refuse to pay? So these are concerns for the future, that this data must be protected so that only those who really need to be allowed access to it have the access and nobody else. Also from the medical devices, if somebody would be able to break into the pacemaker defibrillator and then modify its settings, so then they could give this defibrillation shock for someone who doesn't need it, and of course that is very dangerous. And someone could also break into an insulin pump that has wireless settings and modify the dosage so that it will not be the correct amount that is administered to the patient. Again, very dangerous. If we go to then smart rooms and buildings, so in an interactive smart building, the building knows a lot of things. So it has a knowledge of history, like for example, the materials, the building process, and the maintenance history of the building, and then the current and historical data, for example, air quality and moisture levels, water quality and energy consumption, and the user profiles, how and when the users interact with the building and how they live. Many smart operations like resource management, for example, or scheduled maintenance, fault detection, air quality detection, of course, rely on this kind of data, but then on the other hand, this is data that might be very valuable to somebody, some malicious actor. For example, here you can see this continuous measurement of electricity consumption in one location, and because this is monitored on a daily basis in real time, so then from this graph you could see that on the year in question, around July 7th, the person who lives in this apartment has probably been on vacation because the consumption of electricity has been much lower than during that month in the other times. So this sort of information could be perhaps misused. Somebody might figure out that somebody is not at home and might, for example, commit burglary at that site. When we go to then smart cities and beyond, so we consider things like smart vehicles and smart ships, autonomous cars, and so of course the big question is that if something happens in these systems, for example, a person is hit by an autonomous car or a smart ship is wrecked somewhere on the sea, so who is liable for that, and how do we deal with these sorts of things? So those are very big concerns. Also, electronic participation in the society is of course something that also is a concern. So at the very best, it's very nice and convenient to have this e-participation, but on the other hand, there are risks like, for example, manipulation of gathered data and interference with the processes, for example, by using denial of service attacks. And when these sorts of events might happen, so then this might lead to the loss of public trust, so that the users don't want to use these electronic systems anymore, and then they are useless, and this trust in the e-participation system will be lost. Then if we consider from the point of view of the participant, the person in the smart environment, so pretty much you could say that the biggest security and safety risks often arise from the ways of the users. So the user habits and sometimes the lack of skills may lead to some vulnerabilities for non-technical cyber attacks, like, for example, social engineering. So somebody might be giving out valuable information that should not be given out to some external actor. So what is needed is an increase in the user security awareness and also convincingly mitigating the user security and privacy concerns, so that then we can build trust, and this way we can build more secure and safe smart environments, and these issues also need to be taken into account in the planning and design phases already. Like I mentioned, so smart environments rely on the massive use of diverse data describing the behavior of these industrial and societal systems, and also the individuals. And that means that we need to have trust in the systems that gather, process, transmit, and store the data. And this data may be very personal and private, so it needs good protection. Also, the environment may make decisions based on the data that have an effect on the entire safety of some environment, for example, or an individual. So, for example, these personal medical implants, automated traffic and public transportation, and even water, heat, and electricity as parts of some cities' infrastructure could be affected. When we are using technical systems, so we can pretty much expect that some previously undiscovered vulnerabilities are probable. And so what we need to do is we need to look at these cybersecurity, safety, privacy, and trust issues from all the abstraction levels. So from the point of view of the individual, the society, the infrastructure. So then let's look at this cybersecurity in the 5G context. Basically, almost everything I have been saying so far applies directly also to 5G enabled environments and communication using 5G. So in terms of smart environments, it will be very vital technology, enabling technology, especially when we think about the building abstraction level onwards. So we have the massive IoT and mission critical IoT types of communication for 5G, where we want to have low power consumption and, on the other hand, robust and reliable connections. for communication. So basically, if we consider the smart environment context I was talking about previously, so all the identified risks and threats apply to this 5G implementations of smart environment. So these are not just 5G technology dependent, but the entire system that uses 5G needs to be considered from this point of view. Then from the broadband user side, so from mobile broadband, 5G is expected to provide us with previously unseen communication speeds in wireless cellular network technologies. So no technology before 5G has been able to achieve such high speeds, meaning that with the low latency and high speed, this will be the de facto easy choice for many consumers who are looking for fast internet connections for the daily needs. And again, we are facing the situation that like with any internet access method, so also the risks in terms of intrusion and stealing information and having the financial, political, ideological goals in terms of hacking. So these will also apply to systems that are using 5G as the communication method. So then what sort of drivers do we have for this 5G security era? We have new service models here. So we have the high speed, that's for the mobile broadband, but then we have for the IoT side, we have the low power requirements, and then we have this mission critical side, critical reliability needs to be addressed. So new models, and all of these have different kinds of requirements for security. So we need for some systems, we don't have to consider the processing burden so much as for some other environments where we have low power and not very high speed processing power available. So we need to have these lightweight solutions. The amount of data to be transported, processed, and stored will become huge with now moving on to 5G, because it enables this machine-to-machine communication, and that means that our machines will start exchanging data, and that means that there will be all sorts of devices that are sending and receiving data, and then there are the data privacy concerns that need to be considered. Again, like for most other ways of communication also. So if there is some private information, the privacy needs to be preserved. Also, the number of new network devices will increase very greatly. So we will have countless new devices like IoT devices, sensors, smart environment enabling devices, and we are getting into this everything always connected. So this means that we will have a huge increase in vulnerable devices and also the threats faced by these devices. So even if there is adequate protection at some specific level in the protocol stack, so if the device is poorly protected, so this will still be potentially dangerous, vulnerable for the entire user's network. So a huge increase in types of threats can be also expected. So then how do we go about securing 5G? Distributed denial of service attacks against, for example, a specific cell tower. So detecting these, that's more maybe 5G system level consideration, but if there would be this sort of attack against the radio side, so then this would require rerouting the traffic and trying to mitigate the effects of the attack. When we think about then the 5G enabled devices around the world, so these millions of IoT devices could be then with some malware, for example, or if those devices are otherwise poorly protected, so these could be turned or made a part of some bot network, and this way a completely new attack surface is created. So we have millions of devices that could be then launching a simultaneous attack through the mobile network. So radio network protection from misbehaving devices is also essential and needs detection, logic, and intelligence. Building trust between the systems and mutual authentication between the user and the network is required. So the network can authenticate the users reliably and make sure that they are allowed to use the network. And on the other hand, the user is able to authenticate the network reliably so that the user will know that it's a legal network that is that the connection is being made to, and not some rogue cell tower, for example. And we are no longer just connecting humans and human identities, but now we are starting to talk about this machine-to-machine communication. So we also need to have ways of evaluating the trustworthiness of IoT hardware, software, and the configuration so that we are able to consider this communicating party reliable. Then when we talk about these small devices, sensors, and IoT devices using 5G, so we need to consider security from the point of view of energy efficiency. So on the other hand, we must ensure secrecy and privacy for data that requires it, while we also preserve power. So that means that we need to have lightweight approaches for cryptographic implementations. Privacy protection, I already mentioned, but then also this compartmentalization is very important, and this is managed, for example, with slicing. And on the other hand, we can also use cryptography so that even if some area or reserved bandwidth has been compromised, so with compartmentalization and cryptographic protection, we can still maintain the other compartments so that their operation is preserved. As a reminder about the connectivity in the network, so now when we talk about networks like 5G, so we are talking about this last mile protection encryption device. So we have the home user, we have a computer or a mobile device, and then this network protection is only for the last mile, but then we need to consider also the end-to-end level protection. So then multiple layers of security are needed, and the encryption, it's not enough to have it just in the last mile connection, but then we need to also make sure that the end-to-end connection is properly protected so that the data will not fall into the wrong hands during transportation. So I conclude my talk here today, and I thank you for your interest in this topic, and my email address is showing here, and so if you wish to have further discussion about this, so please drop me a message. Thank you for your interest in this presentation.